Welcome everyone to another edition of Running World Malaysia. My name is Greg Parker. I am actually from the UK, but I'm beaming live from Kuala Lumpur today. It's a pleasure to have you all on the call, and I hope more will join as well as we go through. Tonight, we'll be discussing the tragedy on Saturday in China in which 21 ultra trail runners perished during an event. With me tonight is Avtar Singh, Malaysia's most experienced ultra distance and extreme sports race director with 22 years of experience in organizing extreme sports events in Malaysia and of course specifically in Borneo. He is recognized as a man who founded and was the race director of the Borneo TMBT Ultra Trail Marathon, the BUTM Ultra Trail Marathon, and the Borneo Death March, name 250k ultra marathon, and is recognized within the industry as the man who introduced the sport of trail running. He also introduced a safety standard, which of course crucial will be discussing today for the sport of trail running in this country. Now Avtar is semi-retired, fully retired, in Kota Kinabalu, and he runs a risk assessment consultancy and outdoor events company, safety and training courses. Now, Avtar, we've seen what happened last Saturday, but can you fill me in and let us all know a little bit more about what actually happened?
The 100K, obviously, 175 runners, if my information is correct. And the runners appear to have been caught in the storm at between 1 and 5 p.m. between checkpoints 2 and 3 on the mountain route. So 2 and 3 appears to be either on the actual mountain itself or the mountain route with very little protection and cover. The one thing I don't know is the altitude that they were operating at and they were running at. So that also is something we need to consider as well. What sort of altitude? Are we talking 1,000 meters? We're talking 1,000 feet, 5,000 feet, 10,000 feet? We just don't know. I don't have that information. There appears to be cutoff times here from the information that's been shared on the official website. It seems as though the majority of runners in the front half of the pack after the race had started were caught between kilometers 21 and kilometer 30 on the mountain section. So I'm going to assume that it's an exposed section of the mountain, exposed to the elements. And it seems to be that some sort of a storm, a blizzard of sorts, had passed through the mountain area. Temperatures dropped for a period of time, I think between 1 and 5 p.m. if the information is correct. Runners, the front half of the pack, unfortunately, were caught on the mountain as the storm blew through, and the 21 appeared to be from the group that was at the front of the pack of the 175 runners that started the race. Without putting any blame out there, because we just simply don't know enough, huh?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I mean that leads me on to my next question. You know, it's easy for us to say there weren't enough health and safety measures, but we don't at this. I mean, what kind of health and safety measures should and would normally be put into practice with such a trail run as this?
Okay, so I think it really depends what sort of terrain, what sort of environment you're operating in, and what sort of conditions you're sending runners into. I mean, obviously, thunder and lightning, we suspend the race. That's a given. If there's an element of the risk, I mean, I'm talking my experience, let's say in the Mount Kinabalu area, where I think the average every year was about 6 runners who were pulled off the race course. You know, in any category, be it the 100 kilometers or the 50 kilometers, on average, it was 6 runners that we would evacuate each year. I think the highest we had was 12 in one year, and that was just a really bad year. Heavy rain, strong winds for much of the late morning into the night. Again, without knowing the facts, without actually looking at an incident report, there's an element of maybe taking things for granted. You know what I mean? You've done one race, you've done two races, you've done three races, and you just don't take something seriously enough. And when it does happen, you're just caught because there's nothing you can do because you haven't really factored, you haven't really planned for that to happen at that particular section of the race course. But it would appear that Mother Nature is another monster in itself, because we have no control over Mother Nature. She'll do what she wants on any race course. So in this instance, I think there's been a failure in the risk assessment, potentially.
Right.
There's been a little bit of a lack of focus on the weather conditions, looking at the weather conditions leading up to the race, weather conditions on the morning of the race, and watching the weather reports, and really understanding what the reports are telling you, and sometimes it's easy to comment in hindsight about these things, and if we're not actually there when these things are happening, it's a bit difficult to understand what's happening behind the scenes. But again, in this instance, I would say that some protocols have failed and some elements of risk assessments have not been carried out. That's just the first impression.
Got it. So, I mean, let's talk about mandatory kit lists.
Okay.
Do you know what kit list the runners will give when they were doing this trail run? And if you do, what would you suggest being a mandatory kit list? Well, now, I think we know some of the areas of this trail were quite exposed.
This is an image that was shared just a short while ago of conditions on the actual mountain at that time. So it's daylight, appears to be very strong winds blowing. It's a photo that's been shared by South China Morning Post today. And you can see emergency blankets have been deployed. Of course, they're not really going to make a difference. The winds are that strong. Blizzard-like winds blowing doesn't really help. What you really need in these sort of situations are good down jackets, good wind protection jackets. And obviously, it doesn't appear that any of the runners seem to have the appropriate jackets at this instance. I can see some wind jackets there, but again, we don't have enough information to sort of make too many assumptions about what runners were generally carrying on this particular section. But what we do have, courtesy of irunfar.com, is the event mandatory kit list, which we have sourced from the official website for the event. So if you look at the mandatory kit list, Greg, you'll notice that the mandatory kit is relatively small, simple. You have the race bib, typical timing chip, GPX file and routes. I presume that's going to be on a Garmin watch of some sort, or a Suunto watch. What I understand, and this is based on reading information that's been shared, the runners were running with some sort of GPS tracker, which allowed them to send out an SOS or an emergency signal back to the organizer. So this was actually pretty useful. And I think that also helped in the search and rescue operation as well. One headlamp only, a whistle, space blanket, and a cell phone. And you'll notice there's no mention of a wind jacket or a down jacket or anything of that nature in the mandatory kit list. It's actually further down in the recommended list. And I think this is something that I think becomes a little bit of a concern, because the jackets, you're in the mountain areas, mountain regions, and the down jacket is just not there on the list. It's not in mandatory, and I think that raises some questions as well. Yeah, but if you notice, ITRA is pretty strict, pretty firm on this. The organizer should prepare a reliable source of meteorological information before and during the race. And yeah, this is sort of something that we are pretty tight on as far as safety standards are concerned in Malaysia. And we've done really well in Malaysia in that regard. I think we've had a pretty good safety standard.
Not that long ago, regarding a marathon in which a runner disappeared and still not been found to this day.
Yeah.
I mean, is there any similarities between what happened in China and also the tragedy in Perak?
I would say no. with the limited information that I have, I would say no, they're two completely different tragedies. And it is a tragedy what happened to the runner in that particular race in Perak. There just is no logical answer to what has transpired in that particular incident. I don't think anybody has answers. Nobody has been able to figure out what has gone wrong in the instance, you know. So it's really, really hard. It's really hard to sort of give an answer to that. But if we were to compare both incidents, I would say no, they're two completely different situations and different issues and different tragedies. And they should be looked upon on its own merit, on its own, and not to be compared. Okay.
So my question is, when are we going to start running again? Right? When are we going to start these trail runs again? When are we going to be open for business? What do you think? What are your thoughts, and how do you see it moving forward?
Very difficult in the next 6 months. I don't think any events will be possible in the next 6 months. Potentially only in 2022, not in 2021. The problems are several. We're finding more and more COVID cases. We're finding the virus is mutating. People who may have been tested and found to be clear are getting infected and are showing symptoms after the testing. We're learning more and more also that people are just not adhering to SOPs, and the SOPs are absolutely crucial. If people would adhere to the SOPs and were hygienic and careful and followed all the recommendations that were made, the risks would definitely be significantly less. The number of cases would significantly be less, but it's not happening. I would think it's very difficult. I think for 2021, very difficult. 2022, possible. Yeah.
So we won't hold our breath till 2022, but we shall look forward in return to trail.
Thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you so much indeed. Everyone, thank you ever so much.
Thanks,
and
guys.
You've been zooming in to Running World Malaysia.